speaking as a feminist on the political left, I'm not afraid to call this a politically conservative, regressive agenda that seeks to enshrine sex stereotypes, very outdated sex stereotypes. And the way that it does that is by saying, if you wear a dress, you're a woman, right? Back in the day, it was declared that women had to wear dresses and stay at home and do dishes. And feminists were very successful in fighting back against that. And today it's politically popular on the left to say that anyone who wears a dress and does dishes and behaves in stereotypically feminine ways is what a woman is. It's incredibly regressive, but this comes across as confusing often to some of the conservatives that I have joined forces with, because they can see quite clearly that it is what is typically understood to be the political left that is pushing this. And it's the Democrats who are pushing this for sure, but that doesn't make gender ideology a progressive ideology. It's actually very regressive, and it's the Democrats who are pushing it.
So you talked earlier about pronouns, and I want to get into that. I would rather get into it later after you've had a chance to kind of unpack your argument. But I think in order to just make sense of the conversation, we've got to talk about pronouns because it gets so confusing about who we're talking about. You said already that you refuse to use pronouns that don't line up with biological sex. Can you explain that to us? Because I think some people see that as rude, or they feel like we should accommodate to whatever somebody calls themselves. We see on name tags and emails that people list their pronouns. Why do you refuse to go along with that?
Yeah, it is becoming more and more common to see pronouns in emails, but two reasons I refuse to go along with it. One is that it's just not true. Wrong sex pronouns are an untruth. And I don't want to live in a world in which speaking a lie is considered unkind or rude. I think it's important that we maintain our connection with the truth. The other reason is that there has been some work done and a very interesting article published called Pronouns Are Rohypnol. For anyone who doesn't know, Rohypnol is colloquially known as the date rape drug. And what this article is essentially arguing is that if we use wrong sex pronouns, and as we hear and absorb wrong sex pronouns, that actually does some work on our psychology. And what it does is it makes us just forget that we're really talking about the material reality of biological sex. It makes us dissociate from the material reality of our sexed bodies, and that it really does do harm. And it might seem innocent, friendly, polite to go along with so-called preferred pronouns. But what a lot of us don't understand is that the use of so-called preferred pronouns is part of a much larger agenda, which I talk about in my book, which is to make our society forget that the reality of biological sex is important in some cases, and it matters. And so the use of preferred pronouns, while it might seem innocent, it's actually quite pernicious, and I don't want to go along with that.
It makes sense to me, but like you said, there's a lot of cultural pressure in different communities, different fields, of course, in academia and the medical institutions. There's a lot of pressure to put on your name tag or whatever, your email, like we said, preferred pronouns. And if you don't, you're seen as, I don't know, maybe on the wrong side of history. You're seen as regressive. You're seen as somebody who's not with it, not with the times. And it's really hard for people to resist that kind of peer pressure. And to me, it seems like, I don't know if I got this right, it seems like by putting your pronouns on there, even if they are traditional, in other words, even if you are a woman and you have she, her, or a man, he, him, that there's a sense in which you're saying, you won't know my gender unless I tell you. It's almost like through the power of language, the movement is trying to get everybody to say, gender is a construct, that you can only tell my gender if I tell you what it is. And so it feels like by putting your pronouns on something that you are acquiescing to the transgender ideology. Is that how you see it? Do you think somebody is complying and acquiescing if they go along with it, no matter what their motive is?
I would go further and I would say it's not almost as if this whole thing is using language to try to get us all to go along with the transgender ideology. It is exactly that. But I would also say that I would not use the word gender where you used it there.
Okay.
I will not use the word gender when what I mean is sex.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. In July, a Berkeley law professor squared off with Senator Josh Hawley, and I'm sure you've seen this. It was viewed millions of times, and they clashed over who could get pregnant. And I just want to play that for you, and then have you explain to us what's happening and maybe how we should think about it. So let's watch that.
Professor Bridges, you said several times, you've used a phrase, I want to make sure I understand what you mean by it. You've referred to people with a capacity for pregnancy. Would that be women?
Many women, cis women, have the capacity for pregnancy. Many cis women do not have the capacity for pregnancy. There are also trans men who are capable of pregnancy, as well as non-binary people who are capable of pregnancy.
So this isn't really a women's rights issue.
We can recognize that this impacts women while also recognizing that it impacts other groups. Those things are not mutually exclusive, Senator Hawley.
Oh, so your view is that the core of this right then is about what?
So I want to recognize that your line of questioning is transphobic, and it opens up trans people to violence by not recognizing them.
Wow, you're saying that I'm opening up people to violence by asking whether or not women are the folks who can have pregnancies?
So I want to note that 1 out of 5 transgender persons have attempted suicide. So I think it's important
because of my line of questioning? So we can't talk about it?
Because denying that trans people exist and pretending not to know that they exist
I'm
is
denying that
dangerous.
trans people exist by asking you if you're talking about women having pregnancies?
Do you believe that men can get pregnant?
No, I don't think women can get
So you are
pregnant.
denying that trans people exist?
And that leads to violence? Is this how you run your classroom? Are students allowed to question you? Or are they
Absolutely.
also treated like this, where
No,
they're told
allowed
that
to
they're
question.
opening up people to violence?
We have a good
by
time in my
questioning?
class. You should join.
I bet.
You might learn a lot.
Wow, I would learn a lot. I've learned a lot just in this
know,
exchange.
absolutely.
Extraordinary.
Yep.
So, Kara, Professor Bridges is obviously a very intelligent woman, accomplished. I spoke with a friend who had her for class at UC Berkeley Law School. And yet, what they're talking about there seems preposterous to most people in America. People with the capacity to get pregnant. But she's not willing to say women are the people with that capacity. Can you help us understand what she's saying? What's happening in law schools or academia in this transgender world that she's living in?
So there's a lot going on in that clip. I do want to just say first, this statistic that is often cited, that 1 in 5 trans people attempt suicide, these statistics have been entirely debunked. And the studies that document the attempted suicides of so-called trans people are methodologically flawed. So I just really want to be careful here, because suicide is a very serious thing, and anyone who is contemplating suicide needs help immediately. And it's tragic anytime someone takes their own life, and I don't want to minimize that. I do just want to say that the professor's statistics are wildly off. So I just want to make that very clear to your listeners, but I know that's not the point of what you're asking. So this whole movement is an attempt to make us forget that sex is grounded in material reality. And I try to make the case in my book. I don't know if I succeed, but I'd welcome listener feedback. I try to make the case in my book that throughout the 1960s and 70s in academia, including notably UC Berkeley, there were a bunch of academics who built on theories of postmodernism to develop something called queer theory. And at the essence of queer theory is the view that sex isn't real. And I think, to their credit, these academics were smart enough to realize that if they tried to push the idea that sex isn't real, they would have failed spectacularly, because all Americans, everybody all over the world, knows what sex is and knows how babies are made and knows that only women get pregnant. We all know this. And so in order to push the agenda that they wanted to push, they made up this word called transgender, and they have persuaded society that the word transgender describes a coherent category of people for whom sex is irrelevant, and it's not true. Nonetheless, they have been remarkably successful in persuading Americans across the political spectrum that that word has some sort of coherent meaning, and it just doesn't.